Hello, everybody, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person, so that's why we're recording this message. My name is Andreas Rasche. I'm a professor at Copenhagen Business School, one of the associate deans of the school as well, and I follow the omnibus process as well as sustainability regulations in the EU quite closely. Let me start maybe by telling you a little bit about the omnibus. The omnibus is a simplification package which simultaneously, hence the name omnibus, which simultaneously amends four different legislations: the due diligence regulation, the so-called CSDDD, so the directive on due diligence, the CSRD, which is the directive on reporting, the taxonomy regulation, as well as CBAM. Now, I will focus quite a bit on CSRD and CSDDD in my remarks. We are recording this actually a day after the vote in the European Parliament. And it's been quite a day, I can say. It's been quite a day yesterday. We have seen the European People's Party, the Conservatives in the Parliament, to basically side with far-right parties in order to vote through the changes, more significant changes actually than what would have occurred if they had teamed up with the center parties. Now, there is a lot of politics behind this, but let me maybe start by saying all of this does not really amount to simplification. In my view, it is very much deregulation. And I think we get a good feeling for this if we look at the scope of the two directives. So the first directive is this reporting directive, the CSRD, and here the scope will be reduced by 90 up to 92%. The suggestion by the Council in terms of scope is 90%. What the Parliament agreed yesterday is minus 92%. And I would ask any politician, what do you simplify if you exempt 92% of companies from a directive? Does this make anything simpler for anyone? No, it doesn't. So it actually makes life harder for investors. It makes life harder also for a lot of companies in value chains that require this data. We should also not forget that the CSDDD, the due diligence directive, will be reduced in terms of scope by 70%. This now doesn't sound as dramatic, but at the end of the day, you need to keep in mind that the scope of the CSDDD from the beginning was not very high. So what we end up with in the end is roughly 1,200, 1,300 companies throughout Europe that will be in scope of this directive. And again, my question would be, should sustainability only be for the giant firms? Should sustainability only be something, that the very large companies are doing? Because in a sense, what the entire omnibus does is it throws us back in time. I've been in this field for over 20 years. I've collaborated also with the UN, for instance, the UN Global Compact, with the WHO. And when I started out, we had a lot of voluntary action. And in a sense, what we are deciding on right now is putting us back into that context. Of course, markets have changed, and the context for businesses has changed also significantly. So we cannot simply say that voluntary action before the omnibus is the same as voluntary action after the omnibus. But nevertheless, politicians count on the enlightened self-interest of businesses, and I do not think that this is correct. It is regulation by wishful thinking. And you shouldn't regulate just by wishful thinking. Let me also say there are a couple of further changes that are made, for instance, to the reporting legislation. For instance, the sectoral indicators have been deleted. This is clear by now. There will be no sectoral standards for the ESRS. And this is unfortunate because sustainability is always very contextual. When I talk to practitioners and also when I talk to kind of students who come from different sectors in my executive teaching, for instance, I see that they have very different concerns. So what we need to make sustainability context sensitive. And without these sectoral standards, we do not do that. So I think in a sense, this is a big loss. And of course, it opens up more for less comparability, less benchmarking across sectors and across companies. Let me also say another big loss is that we have lost civil liability, EU-wide civil liability for the due diligence directive. This is not simplification at all. And I also try to communicate this very clearly to some of the negotiators in the European Parliament. So what we had before is one common EU-wide civil liability regime. What we are moving towards are 27 different national civil liability regimes. This makes life incredibly hard for companies, and it is not simplification at all. And this is what brings me back a little bit to what I said in the beginning. We are not seeing actually reasonable and technically sound debates around simplification here. What we are seeing is driven by political ideology, and this is not the way it's supposed to be. Let me also comment a little bit on the role of companies, because of course one of the key arguments of the politicians is we will make you so much more competitive whenever we take this back. Whenever we take regulations back, you save on compliance costs. This makes you more competitive. We need this right now. Now, let me say, I do sympathize with the argument that we need to make businesses more competitive. Yes, but we cannot just blame it on sustainability regulation or regulation as such. Competitiveness is a very complex construct. Competitiveness, for instance, emerges whenever you have access to skilled labor, when you have a superb digital infrastructure, when you in general have a lot of good infrastructure for innovation around you, when you have less high energy prices. This is also what Mario Draghi pointed out. At the end of the day, just complaining about a few regulations doesn't really do the job and doesn't save the amount of money on the corporate side that is necessary. Also, of course, we need to look into the realities of many companies. When I talk to companies here in Denmark, they say, well, look, strictly speaking, we don't care what the politicians decide because we will need to report anyway. Why? Because our customers, our suppliers, our buyers, they are demanding this type of information. So what we will be moving into, I think, is a world of more voluntary action, but also more what I would call bilateral disclosures between companies, between company A and company B, because company A wants some carbon data from company B. And this, of course, undercuts comparability. This undercuts, again, benchmarking. And this also, by the way, opens the door to greenwashing, because companies will, in the future, if they are not legally mandated, they will keep also data for themselves and only disclose it to those parties that really ask for the data: rating agencies, banks, and maybe their business partners. So in a sense, this is a world, I think, that we do not want. And also, of course, that banks in the end and financial institutions do not want, because particularly investors, they need this data. Banks in the future will have access to less sustainability information, and this, of course, will make life much harder for them. By the way, this was one of the reasons why the ECB, in their opinion, so very clearly also said, please put the threshold at 500 employees. What we got now in the end is 1,750. So it didn't really resonate, unfortunately, what Mrs. Lagarde said. So at the end of the day, financial institutions will need to rely more on third-party data that is often estimated, and this does not actually give you the granularity and the different comparability that is necessary. So to wrap up, what we are needing here is we are needing more purposeful action. We are needing more also ambitious actions by company. I think the Green Deal is still alive. Also, the Sustainable Finance Action Plan is still alive, but they are different post-omnibus than they were before. It is up to all of us at the end of the day to really push for changes that make sense and to embed this new reality. It is a political decision. Many of the people that I talk to, they are not in favor of these decisions. They think they are completely overdone. But it is a reality that we need to live with because at the end of the day, of course, the political frameworks, dictate what is going on, whether we like it or not. Nevertheless, as indicated, I think we are still living in a world where the Green Deal and the Sustainable Finance Action Plan are alive, we need to fill them with new meaning. And this remains the challenge to come for the next couple of years. Thank you very much for your attention.